This part of New Jersey isn't like the part of New Jersey you see on The Sopranos. You know what I mean? It's wooded. It's all protected.
Yeah, so New York City's like that way-ish. It's probably about, as the crow flies, 20 to 40-ish miles away.
It's definitely got everything to serve as like a potential greenway for something like where something like a Sasquatch could, in theory, just use it as like a travel route to move through undetected.
We're in Wantage, New Jersey, which is in Sussex County, New Jersey. There was actually an incident that made the newspaper, and one night this tall, hairy being came and ripped apart their rabbit pen and started eating them, and they got their guns and scared it away.
Rabbit autopsies fuel Bigfoot mania.
Back in the 70s, there was a park ranger that actually had an encounter, but the distinct feature was it had glowing red eyes, and thus he coined the term Big Red Eye.
For people who've never heard about it and might be a little taken back by the idea of Bigfoot sightings even happening in that area, as far as the terrain goes, they might be pleasantly surprised. When people first think about New Jersey, first things they probably think about are Newark, it being so densely populated, the Jersey Shore. In actuality, in Jersey, the majority, over 50% of that population, it's pretty much concentrated in that little northeast corner, kind of where Newark is, and just that area around New York City. Down the coastline, where the Jersey Shore area is. Outside of that, though, North Jersey, Northwest Jersey, it's very green, a lot of forests, a lot of foothills, that kind of terrain. You go out beyond there, a lot of North Jersey looks pretty similar to the Hudson Valley in New York State as far as the terrain goes.
I think people overlook New Jersey just because of the proximity to Manhattan, but what they don't realize is up here in Sussex County and Warren County, where the Appalachian Trail, and Passaic County, where the Appalachian Trail runs through New Jersey, there's a lot of protected land. It's going to be hilly, compared to Colorado or New Hampshire. There's not really mountains, we have hills. It's a rocky terrain, but then there's also a lot of the old defunct railroad systems that are, now turned into rail trails, or they're just empty. And there's a lot of them that intersect this county. We have the huge mining industry back in the day in northern New Jersey. So there are cave systems. It's a very mineral-rich area. There's a lot of farmland. There's a lot of pastures. There's apple orchards, and there's pumpkin patches, and there's loads of cornfields, and now soy. So, but it's kind of like the garden for the Garden State. Besides South Jersey, which has, all the blueberry patches, this has a lot of corn up here. So I believe that's why it's underestimated. But I think just the proximity, the fact that there's 2 or 3 major highways in this area, and New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the country, But then again, what do you need for a Bigfoot sighting? You need a Bigfoot, you need a person. So, I think if there's more people out in the woods up here, I think the sighting chances are increase just because of the amount of people that are actually in the woods up here. This county actually has the highest population of black bear. There's always been a big population of black bear, but I think what happens is just as people have been encroaching, more and more into their habitat, now it's more prevalent. I know like probably 10, 15 years ago there was a drought, so I think a lot of them maybe came over from Pennsylvania, so that might have helped increase the population, but I think there was always a significant population, but it's just the fact that we're building in their home, that's why it's more prevalent. So if it can support a black bear population, it could support other predators or large mammals.
So I don't know too much about it, but basically Petals the bear, it was this bear that it was sighted in North Jersey. It became a pretty well-known local story, kind of like throughout New Jersey. It was basically this big black bear, and there's something wrong with one of its front paws. It would be frequently seen a lot walking like upright on its hind legs. That's how it kind of like earned its reputation. And
you mentioned Petals, who was the bear that was up on the 2 feet. Well, it's not really a problem in my view, but apparently there's a problem in someone's view that there needs to be a bear hunt every year. And I think one of the first or second bear hunts, someone actually got it in their mind to shoot Petals. And it's sad because there was a bear that was walking on his 2 feet and learned how to rummage through garbages and was living his life. But the person that actually shot him got such a backlash from shooting him that he actually had to move out of the state.
I remember hearing about Petals like when it first became a thing. I don't remember hearing about like when Petals actually got shot though. But I do remember like seeing a few things pop up about him in the news. So yeah, like regionally the story spread about him spread pretty far. I do think the vast majority of Bigfoot sightings are either just BS or misidentifications. Having said that though, in the case of bears, I think, Petals is a good example. I think there's a lot of like physical distinctions between what you see in like an upright bear and what people are actually describing. And I think there's two major differences. The first one is the arm placement. When people describe Squatches, they describe them having those big broad shoulders, their arms out to the sides like that. Bears though, when they're upright, their arms are kind of like tucked in and out like that. So I just think in terms of just like anatomy and things like that, that's like a pretty major distinction, that even if you're not the most reliable witness, if you have like a clear-cut sighting of something like that, I think you're going to be able to like tell that difference. I guess the other one is just like the shape of their shape of their heads. Bears have like their ears protruding out from the sides of their heads. Squatches don't really have that. Bears kind of have like more circular shaped heads. Squatches have like the cone-shaped head. Bears got the snout. Then the third thing too is how long the people say the Squatches' arms are. They go down to their side. They go like at their knees or below their knees, and bears kind of their arms are tucked in like that. You don't really hear or see many like images or videos of bears just like their arms hanging out to the side, going down that low like that. At least with like clear-cut sightings, I think one of the only times an upright bear could be mistaken for a Squatch is if like it's just like a brief glimpse of a sighting. You don't see the whole thing. Maybe just like the angling, the lighting kind of messes up your point of view.
This is a section of the Appalachian Trail that crosses from New York into New Jersey, or New Jersey into New York. It's actually a really nice area. So it goes right here, and it kind of parallels this lake called Greenwood Lake. The terrain isn't too crazy. It's kind of like this flat ridge line, so it's pretty flat. Just walk across it. The scenes are gorgeous. So right now we are on the Appalachian Trail. We're in Orange County, New York. So this is the section of the AT. It's close to like the New York, New Jersey border. This particular section, it parallels this lake called Greenwood Lake. It kind of just like goes along with it. And we're kind of on like a ridgeline right now. So the terrain's really flat. It's pretty easy to navigate. And from end to end, it's about 5-6 miles or so. So we keep heading that way. The New York, New Jersey border, it's distinctly marked on the trail. It's about 3 to 5, I'd say, miles away from here. Yeah, so New York City's like that way-ish. It's probably about, as the crow flies, 20 to 40-ish miles away, depending on what you consider the city. If it's like the Bronx, Manhattan. The specific area we're in right now, the town we're technically in, it's called Warwick. I don't know the details, but I've heard like a second, third-hand claim a couple of years ago that like supposedly like some woman saw one in this Warwick area. Orange County itself, there've been a couple of well-documented sightings. Like I know Harriman State Park has a couple. There was one story where some dude was like driving the roads either in, I think it was Harriman State Park. Some dude was driving the roads one winter, saw him just like sitting on like a ridge, got up and walked away. I think people have found footprints in Bear Mountain, which, that section of forest, it's part of kind of like the same area where Harriman is. The Appalachian Trail runs through it. There's one report, these fishermen a few years ago, they were fishing on this lake in Harriman State Park, and I think they saw something or they saw like some large figure going through the reeds. I think they got like rocks or sticks thrown out there. But the investigator who took that report said too, like the people he interviewed about it, they were pretty shook about it still. Just when they were recounting it, I think he said like one of them started crying or something like that. So you look around, if they're not like posting up here full time, at the very least, I don't see why one couldn't at least pop through here undetected. There's definitely everything they need for that. So a lot of the reports in this specific area, they're very few and far between. Details are kind of scant, but I haven't really noticed any standout patterns in terms of like time of year or anything like that. A few happened in the like summer, one happened in the winter, I think some happened in the fall, so kind of pretty readily dispersed. Nothing crazy like that. I mean, winter, like there's not a lot of cover, but there's probably like a lot less people that come around these areas. Summertime, there's more cover, probably more food available, but there's more foot traffic. I personally think that factors like that don't really matter, because like if you just look at Class A's alone, the overwhelming majority of them happen when the witness is driving. There's really, if you really like look at the data, break that stuff down, like very, very small percentages of Class A's are seen by people who are like hiking or camping or even hunting. I just for like something I was researching, I looked at like every single Class A report in the BFRO database publicly posted since 2014, so the last 10 years. There was like 200 something odd reports. Over 60% the witness was driving. Like 10 to 15% people were doing outdoor recreations like hiking, camping. I think like 10% was hunting. So I don't really think like people's witnesses or whereabouts, I don't really think that's as big as a factor. I've set up trail cameras a few times. Two instances. Once on the New York side, probably another mile or so down the section of the trail, just like a few hundred feet off trail, and then another time a few years ago on the New Jersey side, pretty much same thing, just follow the trail a little bit, went a few hundred feet off of it, found a spot. Both times I left them out for about 4 to 6 weeks. I got some good stuff. I got some deer, some bear, it's a good sample of wildlife. Whenever I do anything with trail cameras, I don't expect to find anything like a Bigfoot or anything like that on them. It's mostly just to gauge just how like the wildlife traffic, what that looks like. So, I always do pretty well with that. There's a lot of deer that come through here, bear, coyote. Got some good shots of like deer, some good sized bears that come through here. So, my figuring is if there's that kind of wildlife traffic coming through here, there's enough resources and cover for them to go through, then why not, why not something like a Bigfoot?
Well, the AT actually runs by Greenwood Lake as well, and there's Wawayanda State Park, and there's another one on the other side of Greenwood Lake. I don't know if that's a county park or state park, but there's been sightings in that area. That's West Milford, which is a very notorious area in New Jersey for weird stuff, cryptids. There's been sightings around that in West Milford as well. So yeah, and on the New Jersey side and the New York side, because Bigfoot, he doesn't understand state lines, he just understands woods. So, but yeah, I definitely believe the AT is definitely the highway for them, and it gets, and then there's a lot of people down there too, so the sightings are going to increase.
It's definitely got everything to serve as like a potential greenway for something like or something like a Sasquatch could, in theory, just use it as like a travel route to move through undetected. When people say they think these creatures, they use the Appalachian Trail to follow, I just think specific sections like that, just how secluded and remote some stretches are, definitely gives a lot of credence to that theory. I personally think, when people say Sasquatches follow the Appalachian Trail, I think there's a lot of people out there at first are under the impression that they follow it literally from Maine to Georgia or vice versa. I obviously don't think that's the case. I just think they'll maybe use it to use it to follow sections, just because it offers perfect amount of cover, goes through enough habitats that'll give them the resources that they need. So I think that's kind of the case there. There aren't that specific area, aside from that third, fourth hand account I got where supposedly a woman in Warwick on the New York side had a sighting. Aside from that, on the New Jersey side of that Greenwood Lake area, back in the 70s, there is one report, I think, in the Passaic County on the BFRO database, where supposedly a man was camping by himself there one night, and he heard this horrible, deep, blood-curdling scream. Whenever I do my data dives and stuff like that, unless there's documentation to go along with it, I usually pay no mind to Class B reports if they just give a description of what the person heard or encountered or whatever. I just think stuff like that, it's very subjective, kind of an eye of the beholder type thing. What, for that specific example, said scream, what they think they heard sounded unique or different enough to warrant reporting. If someone with more familiarity with wildlife in general or wildlife in the area might have heard it, it might be more identifiable. So as far as I'm concerned, with reports like that, if there's no documentation, nothing to actually compare what they heard with, then it's kind of useless as far as I'm concerned. But in that regard, though, I guess it's worth mentioning. It's this is what happened, this is where it happened, this is what the person heard. Take it for what it's worth.
And actually, there's another greenway that actually attaches Greenwood Lake, and it goes south into Essex County, which is one of the most densely populated counties in New Jersey. And there's actually Bigfoot sightings down in the Livingston area. And it's all with one of the BFRO, on the BFRO data, is a lady that was looking at her bathroom window, and she saw this 8-foot hairy thing, walking in her backyard, basically in the tree line in her backyard, and it freaked her out that she moved 3 weeks later. And a buddy of mine I used to work with actually was her neighbor, and he's like, yeah, we hear noises, and that's 10-15 minutes from Newark, New Jersey, which is a very urban area, and that's about 15-20 miles from Manhattan.
So I know the Ramapo area, that's more Bergen County. It's a lot more densely populated, busier there. I don't know of any credible or worthwhile reports that happened in that area. The Ringwood State Park, though, I know of at least 2 or 3 reports that supposedly happened the 70s and 80s in that area. I mean, it's still a pretty rural, remote-ish area, but obviously back in the 70s and 80s, it was a lot more. It was probably a lot more remote and rural than it is today. But there is at least 2 or 3 BFRO reports. I actually know the investigator very well who took them, and they all happened in Ringwood State Park, and they all happened along this road. It's either called Skyline Drive or Skyline Lane or something like that, but they all took place along the same road. It was just people driving. They saw something like on the side of the road or across the road. So yeah, there's been like nothing recent, but there have been reports that have come out of that area over the years.
Okay, so Clinton Road is a road that runs from Route 23 in West Milford, and it goes, it skirts New York State, and it heads over to Hamburg Turnpike, which is also in West Milford.
Yeah, it's really hard to start when it comes to Clinton Road. There's a lot of people, they consider it the most haunted road in the United States. So it's basically this 10-mile stretch of road, it's in the Passaic County, and it's one of those counties in North Jersey that borders that kind of like, that Hudson Valley area of New York State. So it's a very it's a very forested, hilly, mountainish, and that's what our standards for mountains are in this part of the country. The unfortunate part though is the road, it cuts through it mostly cuts through Newark watershed area, so that's like reservoirs, like drinking supply for Newark, New Jersey. So it's very heavily patrolled, heavily posted. To even just hike in those areas, you need a permit. You can't even hike there at night or else you'll get arrested. So authorities are really strict about just patrolling it and keeping people who aren't supposed to be there away. Obviously, there are some people who think they have some ulterior motives for doing it, but that's a whole different conversation.
And back in the day, there was like an iron kiln there, and there used to be some industry there. But there's supposedly a family that kind of protects the area. Like if you drive it at 2 o'clock in the morning, you'll have a truck follow you. There's been satanic rituals there. There's been rapes there. It's kind of a weird area.
Yeah, as far as the lore goes, it's just one of those places. It's like a hub for high strangeness. Like you name it, Clinton Road has it. Some of the most famous stories are there's Dead Man's Curve. It's just like this really tight curve. Apparently they've had issues with accidents there and stuff like that.
Yeah, so right now we're in an area of Clinton Road called Dead Man's Curve, and the story is this bridge that we're on. Supposedly, as the story goes, a kid drowned in this brook over here, and if you come up to it at night and throw pennies off of it, some versions say the kid will either the ghost of the kid will throw them back at you, or if you leave and come back later, you'll find the pennies on the side, on the bridge, a short time later.
So there's that. There's two ghost phantom car stories. Supposedly in the 80s, some woman in it was either a Corvette or a Camaro. They died in a car wreck, and sometimes you'll see that. The more famous one is there's stories of a ghost truck or a phantom truck. So you'll be driving down the road, and other haunted areas in the country have the same story, and you'll see phantom lights of a pickup truck or something like that. It'll really close to you, chase you down the road. There's a few stories I've seen about that. There's stories of a ghost hitchhiker. This woman, she'll be on the side of the road trying to get a ride, and you pull up to her, she'll just disappear. People have obviously, there's been UFO sightings, orb sightings, moving on to cryptids there. People have seen mountain lions, large dogs, hellhounds supposedly have been spotted, and there've been the road's had its fair share of Bigfoot sightings. A lot of anecdotal stuff, but three particular ones that I found in the late 90s, early 2000s. This one dude said that he was driving on the road, and he saw, it was either he crossed the road or was walking alongside and just went to the tree line, but he said he saw a Bigfoot, large Bigfoot-like creature with matted reddish orange hair. And then sometime after that, that witness, his son, claimed they had rocks getting thrown at them. As far as just off sheer probability alone, whenever I hear the offspring of a witness or someone else that they know has something similar happen, that kind of raises eyebrows to me. But again, this is just what I've this is just what I've seen and heard, what's out there. I'm just relaying it. You don't draw your own conclusions. Then there's another, a more harrowing account. Two cyclists were going down the road. I think it was kind of like dark out, and they claimed that like a Bigfoot-like creature burst through the trees, chased them for a little bit, was like screaming and hollering, and then just like ran back into the woods after a while. So those are probably like the three most interesting ones. And then another interesting thing too, and some people think this could potentially explain some of these Bigfoot sightings. There used to be a zoo about a few miles away from Clinton Road called Jungle Habitat, and it shut down a few decades ago. So like the story has it that some of the animals they were able to like relocate, find homes to, but other ones they couldn't find anything in time, so they supposedly just let them loose in the wild. So, they entailed like large cats, primates, monkeys, other primates. So one of the things people claim to see on Clinton Road are just like weird hybrid animals, because the rumor is that these animals that got released from the zoo, they started interbreeding with each other and interbreeding with like the local wildlife. Some people think, is it possible that some of these escaped monkeys, they don't really specify what kind of monkeys, so it leaves a lot of room for speculation. That could be anything from like a small like macaque to maybe like a great ape, like a chimpanzee or an orangutan. Is it possible that maybe, if some of these monkey species were larger, that could explain some of the supposed Bigfoot sightings people had?
I used to have to use that road to commute to one of my accounts, like probably 7-8 years ago, and I used to do it during the daytime, so it never really bothered me. And I was coming home, and it's just an easy road because it cuts out probably about 20 minutes for my regular commute. So I was driving home, and it was right around like 5:30, 6 o'clock. So the sun was just kind of like down far enough where it was like in your eyes. And I remember the sun being really glaring my eyes. And then all of a sudden I started feeling really, like I couldn't see anything on the sides of the road or anything like that, but I just started feeling really sick, almost like I got zapped or I got, with the infrasound. And it was at the point where you were on that road where there's no place to turn off. It's like, basically a road and then woods. So I was able to actually, find a spot to pull off, and I opened the door, and I was kind of, got rid of what I had to get rid of. And then it just seemed like after a couple of minutes, it just all went away, and I was fine. And I was like, just look around like, oh, okay, let's just keep on going back to work, back to home. But it was just really weird that it was just, I got really dizzy and I got really sick, and it was just for like 2 or 3 minutes, and then it subsided and I was fine. So I don't know if there was something in the woods that was kind of zapped me or what it was, if there was sun in my eye or what it was, but I drive in at 5:30, 6 o'clock at night all the time, and never had that issue with sun in my eyes before, so that's why it was kind of a weird situation.
Wantage, New Jersey, which is in Sussex County, New Jersey. I live probably about 20 minutes from here. The significance of this road, this is Wolfpit Road, and back in the 70s, I want to say mid to late 70s, there was actually an incident that made the newspaper, the local newspaper, New Jersey Herald, where a family had a rabbit pen on their farm, and one night this tall, hairy being came and ripped apart their rabbit pen and started eating them, and they got their guns and scared it away. And then the next night, all the neighbors decided to sit on their porch and wait to see if this thing would come back, and sure enough it did, and they were able to get off a couple rounds and scare it off, and it kind of took off into the pasture, and it was back. It was an area close to here, but there was an apple orchard, so it kind of went through the apple orchard to kind of escape, and it was significant enough where they called the state police and they got the newspapers involved, and So this is Wolfpit Road, which is similar to a Brer Road up in Whitehall, and so this is Jersey's version.
Rabbit Autopsies Fuel Bigfoot Mania by Richard E. Harpster. Autopsies on the bodies of 7 rabbits found dead on a farm here last month led credence to claims that rabbits were killed by Bigfoot, or something like it. Robert Jones, Byram, president of Vestigia, an investigative and educational organization which conducts inquiries into strange and unusual occurrences, had the autopsies performed by Dr. Donald B. Chateau, a Hackettstown veterinarian. He also obtained a report on teeth marks from Dr. Charles L. Weedman, a Hackettstown dentist. The autopsies on the rabbits revealed they were killed by someone or something which took their heads in one hand and their hindquarters in the other and gave a sharp yank. The skulls and the hindquarters were crushed. In the case of a rabbit with its head missing, there were no indications of teeth marks. The torsos of 3 of the rabbits revealed broken ribs. Internal organs had burst from the pressure. There were teeth marks, but no puncture wounds. The dentist reported, "If the figures for human teeth are applied to the measurements obtained from the rabbits, it is interesting to note that human teeth and jaws are about 1/2 the size required to make the punctures. From this, one can speculate that the punctures might have been made by a creature with teeth and jaws about twice as large as those of a human being." The results of the autopsies, though not conclusive evidence in themselves, do tend to support the idea of a Bigfoot presence on the farm. Not only is the hypothetical behavior of Bigfoot not violated by the autopsy data, but it is actually in keeping with that supposed behavior, the report read. The story of the killing of the rabbits on the farm of Richard Seitz, Wolfpit Road, and the sighting of Bigfoot has attracted nationwide attention. The family gave this account. Early on the morning of May 12th, Seitz's wife discovered something had smashed a large unlocked door to the shed where the rabbits were kept. She found the bodies of the rabbits neatly lined up on top of their cages. The family called state police. The creature returned each night for several days. Shots were fired, but apparently had no effect.
Well, I'm just going to refer back to the Seitz family sighting from the 70s. I mean, I just thought it was really interesting how the thing actually went into the rabbit cage and just ripped apart the pen and then started eating and destroying these rabbits. And I just to have it, obviously it must have been really hungry for it to be so aggressive. And the fact that there were people, the family and the neighbors all banded together to kind of protect the property with guns. And since they fired their guns, I'm sure they had to get the police involved. But that was just a very significant sighting and story.
High Point probably has the most amount of sightings in the area. That's where the Appalachian Trail runs through New Jersey. Actually, you can probably, the ridge line, that's basically the Appalachian Trail right there. So it goes from High Point into Stoke State Forest and then down into the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area. So that whole area is all protected, and it's a greenway. You got the AT running through it. So, but High Point and this area, Wantage and Montague themselves have had the highest amount of Bigfoot sightings, in our area. There's tracks been found. People have seen, tall, hairy beings walking down the road. People have heard howls at nighttime. And there's actually another road I'll show you, Kelly Road, which is in the same town, just on the other side, which is where they had our most recent sighting, which was about 2 years ago, where there was a road crossing. And the significance of this, you have the AT Trail, you have the Walkill River, and plus you have a lot of old railroad beds. So there's a lot of different areas where a Bigfoot could walk without being noticed. In the summertime, we have a lot of cornfields, we have a lot of tomato, and then in the fall we have the apples and the pumpkins. So it's a great place to have to have a meal. Plus all the farmers. There's stories of pig farmers and around here where they've seen something kind of step over the fence, grab a pig, and kind of take off and just But the thing about this area is that everyone's really conservative, so they're not really, if something happens on their property, they're just going to keep it to themselves. unless obviously they're shooting something, then they have to get the police involved. But we are in New Jersey. You can't really shoot guns on your property here. All right, so this is Kelly Road. Now, I want to say about a year and a half, 2 years ago, there was a road crossing of a Bigfoot. So that's probably the most recent Bigfoot sighting we've had in Sussex County. And if you look, it crossed over Lake Walkill Road, and then it came down Kelly Road, and then it kind of just disappeared into this area. It was around dusk, and it was a couple. They were coming from, I think, dinner or from shopping, in town, and they were coming down this road, and they just saw the Bigfoot cross over the road and just kind of walk down. And they weren't Bigfoot fans, or they weren't, so they didn't think to take pictures, they didn't think to follow it. They just, there was a group, local group, and they just posted in that group saying, hey, we think we saw something. So it was, but this is, like I said, this area is just loaded with sightings like that. And I'm glad that they actually said something, because a lot of times they don't. People just keep it to themselves. Now this is the Walkill River Wildlife Preserve that we're on right now, and the significance of this piece of land is about 3 or 4 years ago, the state actually put hair traps in a person's property that borders this preserve. And of course they found bobcat, deer, raccoon. They also found about 15-20 hair samples of something that was unidentified. But they kind of kept it to themselves. But they told the property owner, like, listen, we found some stuff that wasn't that we don't really know about. So that's the significance of this piece of land. And we're right by the AT. We're right by the Walkill River. It's right here. So this is the heart of the Bigfoot sightings in Sussex County, right here. Okay, yep, so right over there we have the monument, which is the highest point. It's only about 1,800 feet, so it's not like it's the Rockies. But if you look out, see the pastures out there, that's where we were before. That is the Wolfpit Road. And then if you look over to that mountain behind the pastures, that's where Kelly Road was, where we were at. So as you can see, it's all in walking distance to High Point State Park, where a lot of this whole area has been just loaded with Bigfoot sightings and different cryptid sightings. So High Point, being the highest point in New Jersey, they made it a state park, and it's also attached to Stoke State Forest. And like I said, the Appalachian Trail, the AT, runs through this park. Back in the 70s, there was a park ranger that actually had an encounter with a Bigfoot, and he described it as an 7 to 8 foot tall, humanoid type creature with hair on it. But the distinct feature was it had glowing red eyes, and thus he coined the term Big Red Eye. And when you have more recent sightings and encounters from people, especially from in this area, they're like, "Oh, it's Big Red Eye, it's Big Red Eye," but it's the glowing red eyes that is the distinct, feature of this. Besides it being 8 feet tall and hairy and stinky. So basically behind us we have the Delaware River. So anything on that side of the river is Pennsylvania, and then everything on this side of the river is New York State. And we have Port Jervis right down there. And then Mike, if you want to explain about the Greenway.
Yeah, so there's like two major greenways in New Jersey. There's this one that crosses North Jersey, kind of stops at the Delaware River, in like northwest Jersey, crosses it, and then kind of like dumps out into the Catskills. And like this area here is where it crosses from Jersey into New York and kind of like dumps out into the Catskills. So this is like the main end of it.
And if you look back over there, that's like the beginning of the Catskills right there. You can see the mountains.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing too, out that way, that leads towards like the Pocono Mountains. There have been a good amount of stories that come out there, and even further, like PA just has this whole network of like foothills and greenways. This is kind of like the start of it on this side, and like you could in theory take these hike just completely through nothing but woods. You get all the way to like Sussex, central PA, that area where you were a few weeks ago.
Any theories I have are just speculative, but what I do believe is there are a number of sightings in northwest New Jersey, Sussex County, New Jersey, particularly in the summer and the fall. That is along the Appalachian Mountains, or the Appalachian Trail. All of a sudden, we have activity in January through March in an area where it's a little farther south. Could that mean that if this creature does exist, that they're moving from Sussex County in the wintertime down into Pennsylvania in the summertime? It very well be possible, especially if that creature needs certain foods to exist. If they need, whether it's meat, whether it's vegetation, root vegetables, anything like that, animals are going to chase the food. So it's very well possible that those animals could be coming down into Pennsylvania along the Appalachian Trail or adjacent to the trail and spending their winter time here in Pennsylvania. For areas that are a little farther away from the Appalachian Trail, there are certain areas up here that are very relatively untouched by humans. We've had a large population boom in the 1980s, 1990s. It kind of fizzled out a little bit in the early 2000s, but then around COVID, people started coming to the area again. However, there's large areas of land that are protected, and whether it's state game lands, whether it's a nature preserve through the Nature Conservancy, or if it's state forest, those areas aren't going to be developed. And some of those areas, you can get into areas that are quite desolate, where if you have not a large population, but a population of maybe 5 or 6 of these animals, very well possible that they could be out there and remain relatively undetected.
Yeah, so the Delaware Water Gap, it's that region in North Jersey. So like New Jersey as a whole, I've talked about this to segue into that. When it comes to like the history of Bigfoot sightings, New Jersey as a whole kind of has like 2 main areas where sightings come out of: the Pine Barrens and the Delaware Water Gap. So if you look at a map of like North Jersey, there's like two major greenways. There's one kind of in more like central northernest Jersey. It kind of runs from like the central part of North Jersey all the way into New York, and kind of like stops at the Hudson River out there. And that's where like your Wawayanda State Park, Wildcat Ridge, Ringwood, Harriman, all those places are. Then up north, you have the Delaware Water Gap Greenway, and that kind of starts at like the New Jersey PA border. It gets cut off by the Delaware River, and it kind of just runs parallel to North Jersey along the section of Delaware River that cuts North Jersey away from PA. And it runs from like west to east, and then eventually it goes into New York and kind of like spills into the Neversink River area, which is like the southern part of the Catskill Mountains, which as you probably know, there's a ton of reports coming out of there. So that part, that specific part of North Jersey, there's ton of sightings coming out of the Delaware Water Gap. In relation to PA, it is, separated by the Delaware River. It's a pretty wide, deep, fast-moving river in a lot of sections. Both sides of the Delaware Water Gap, Delaware State Forest and PA, just different places, different sections in North Jersey. I've done nighttime investigations there. I've gotten some interesting audio on both sides. Delaware State Forest, we got some possible knocking sounds. Yeah, as far as whether or not they could feed off each other, you have the Delaware River, but there are some sections where it gets narrow enough, maybe shallow enough where, yeah, in theory, something could probably move across there. I guess especially even now, during the winter time when it freezes over, I guess it's conceivable for them to maybe cross back and forth if they wanted to for whatever reason. Delaware State Forest, it's kind of it's kind of eastern-ish, northeasternish PA, Pennsylvania, and it's surprisingly a pretty big state forest, and it's got a lot of really remote sections. We found one section that we investigated back in 2020, and it was one of those areas as the crow flies, we were at least a mile or two away from the nearest house, paved two-way road, really swampy, marshy area. We recorded some possible knocking sounds on there. The most interesting story I've heard coming out of that area was, and this is a second, third-hand account that was told to me. Supposedly a trucker was driving down this one main road. I think it was during the day too. Actually, it was either during the day or at dusk at some point then. And supposedly he saw a family of Squatches, a mother figure, father figure, and I think two younger ones, literally walking across the road. And then I guess when they saw the truck, they were walking across the road and they kind of just scurried into the woods. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, I was on an expedition with the group, and one of the guides at in the North Jersey area, Delaware Water Gap area, and we spent some time poking around in Delaware State Forest, and he actually took us to the actual location where that sighting supposedly occurred.
A personal experience I had, and it was, and like I said, I can't confirm what I saw. I can't confirm it as a Bigfoot. It was just very, very weird. About 25 miles south of here, along the Appalachian Trail, there's a town called Wolfpit. And in this town, there's a restaurant. So it's my favorite restaurant. I go there all the time. And basically, you're sitting in this restaurant. It's got a whole bunch of windows. There's a field, but the ridge behind the restaurant, that's the Appalachian Trail. And I was first of all, I dropped my aunt off to park, to let her get the table, and I parked the car. And as I'm going into the restaurant, I was smoking at the time, I was having a cigarette, and I see these two couples looking at each other, and they're kind of looking at each other weird. And I'm like, oh, these people fighting, or what's going on here? So I'm being curious. I still had some cigarette left. I'm smoking, and they keep on looking at themselves, but then they're looking at the woods across the street from the restaurant. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird. Why are they looking up there? And like I said, I'm finishing my cigarette, and sure enough, a couple minutes, I'm almost about to finish my cigarette, I hear a tree get pushed down. And it was weird because, and that's why I think they were looking in the woods, because they must have heard something before that, maybe a weird noise or something, a wood knock or something, but they weren't moving. They weren't, just kind of looking. And so I heard a tree get pushed down, and the weird thing was that there's a steep hill, and the tree didn't fall down the hill. The tree was kind of pushed sideways. So it was kind of gravity would, if a tree fell down naturally, it would be falling down the hill. It wouldn't be falling sideways. And then you heard heavy footfalls going up and away from where the tree was pushed down. So it was kind of weird that happened. So, and this is right when I was getting back into Bigfoot, so I didn't really, had seen stories about that. So I'm in the restaurant having dinner, and I'm looking out at this pasture, and all of a sudden I see this thing stand up, and the grass was probably about 4 feet tall. It was tall, like just grass, brownish, tannish grass. I see this thing stand up, and it looks like reddish brown. And I'm looking, and granted, now it was June. It was June, like the first or second week in June. So it was about 80 degrees with about 90% humidity. So it definitely wasn't hunting season. And I'm thinking to myself, like, why is there some guy in a ghillie suit in this hot weather, first of all, and it's not even hunting season. And I'm reaching for my phone to try to take a crappy picture, because all pictures are crappy of Bigfoot. So, and I'm reaching down, and I got my phone, and as I grabbed my phone, this thing kind of just knelt back down into the tall grass. Like, it didn't fall forward, and it didn't, it just kind of knelt down, and then I never saw it again. So that was another reason. I'm like, well, if that was a person, why would you be crawling through this tick-infested grass? Probably got snakes and, you know what I mean? And like I said, it's 80 degrees. It was miserable out. You know what I mean? I was sweating inside in the AC. It was terrible. So it definitely wasn't a deer because I didn't see a snout. It definitely wasn't a black bear because this thing was reddish brown, and the black bears up here are jet black. So, and I'm like, oh, maybe that's what the tree being pushed down was. Maybe it was a mother figure, because this thing wasn't massive. It was just tall and kind of slender, but it was probably like 6.5, 7 feet tall, and 6.5 feet tall, we'll say. So maybe it was a mother or a father figure trying to warn the juvenile, hey, get out of there, And I was just, like I said, that I can't say confirm what it was, but it's just deductive reasoning. Why would there be a hunter in June, crawling around a field? Well, if you look at the BFRO database and stuff like that, a lot of the sightings from there were from the mid 70s and 80s, and then there's more now. Obviously now, but there's stories all over the place. And like I said before, that this area is a really conservative area. So I think if people do see something, they're going to keep it to themselves, because they don't want idiots like me showing up at their doorstep looking for Bigfoot. You know what I mean? So they kind of, keep it to themselves. But that's why I think when you look at the databases, you'll see stuff from like the 80s and the 90s instead of more recent. And like the Kelly Road where we were at, that was actually, like I said, that wasn't on the BFRO database. That was on a different Bigfooting group's site. And I just, knowing the area, I was like, all right, let me go investigate this myself. So,
with Appalachian Trail runs, when it comes into PA and enters New Jersey, it pretty much cuts through the Delaware Water Gap into Highport and Stokes, kind of like parallels the Delaware River. Instead of like going into, it keep following that Greenway and going into the Catskills, which I guess most people would probably expect, it kind of makes like this hard right turn, and then starts following the New York-New Jersey border. Then makes like another turn into New York. It's kind of what like connects those two greenways I told you about. It goes through like Harriman, Bear Mountain, that area, and literally crosses the Hudson River, goes into like that eastern side of the Hudson Valley, Putnam, Dutchess County, before going into Connecticut. That surprises a lot of people. You'd expect it, like I said, you'd expect it to keep following that Greenway going into the Catskills, and then just bypassing like New York, just bypassing like Connecticut, Massachusetts, it probably expecting to go straight into Vermont, but yeah, it doesn't do that. I'm not sure how that came to be, how that wound up becoming like by design, but yeah, it's it's fairly close to New York City. It's not like when I say close to New York City, relatively close, like it's still like a good ways away, like at least 45 minutes, like an hour drive outside of New York City. And when you mention New York City, it's a pretty ambiguous term, because when you say New York City, the first people think of is downtown Manhattan, where the crazy skyscrapers are, the bustling crowds. But New York City, it's got 5 different boroughs. The closest borough, it's the Bronx, and it's definitely more like a urbanized, bustling, much more populated area. That and Westchester County, where I live, it's not really the first thing people think of when like the term New York City comes to mind, but at the same time, though, it's it's like the closest part of New York City to those areas. Like the actual like Manhattan area, it's like downtown Manhattan area, it's much further away compared to like the actual like outskirts of like any New York City borough, if that makes any sense.
Well, it's funny because all my family, they think I'm nuts because they think, well, A, because they think, because I believe in Bigfoot, but the fact that, being in New Jersey, it's like, they're not this close to Manhattan or whatever. And I said, well, you want to come out in the woods with me? We can go look for them, we can experience some stuff. But for people that, this part of New Jersey isn't like the part of New Jersey you see on The Sopranos. You know what I mean? It's wooded. It's all protected. It's, a lot of fields and a lot of food sources. We have a huge deer population here. So there's many different, you can sustain a diet to live here. And like I said, it's attached to New York State, and so, you can walk across the river to Pennsylvania. So the area, it's not just northern New Jersey. I don't think Bigfoots live here per se. I think they come and visit. There might be maybe one or two that live here. But for the most part, I think they use this whole area, the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, to live and to sustain a life. So, but I definitely do believe they come to New Jersey when it's time to harvest the corn, when the apples are able to pick. They come before hunting season. They have the deer. There's deer all over the place on the roads getting hit by cars. I'm sure they use that as an easy meal too. So, plus all the rivers, the Wallkill River and all these different rivers, they're all stocked with trout every spring. So that's another food source.